Let's open the Storm Tracker Open, and I want you to toggle open examples and double-click on stormtrackeropen.mov. So we're going to take a look at the final composite before we start. So let's just play this. And you can see we have our background in there, we have our text, we have our lightning, and we have a couple of more elements that we're going to need to create, the radar and also the text treatment in the background. So let's stop that, close it, and begin our lesson. So I want you to grab Storm Background, and I want you to drag it to the composition icon, and then release it. What this is going to do, it's going to ensure that we have our composition with the same settings as our Storm Background animation. We can scroll on that just to make sure that everything's good, and it is. So the next thing we need to do is add our radar. So let's go in and create a new solid. So Layer, New, Solid. Let's call it Radar. And let's make this larger than 720 by 486. We're actually going to make this 2000 by 2000. We're going to make sure the color is pure black. Click OK, and click OK. Now, we're going to have to add the radio waves effects to this. So let's go to Effects and Presets and type in Radio Waves. Let's double-click on Radio Waves. We'll stretch this out a little bit. And if we scroll through the timeline, we can see our radio waves on top of our background. Now I'm going to turn off the background for a second because it'll be a little bit easier to work with the radio waves without seeing the background. So let's change a couple of the properties inside the radio waves. The first thing I want you to do is open up the stroke, and we're going to change the profile from square to sawtooth in. So what this is going to do is we're going to have a solid outside and we'll have a gradiated inside. Let's change the color from blue to green. So let's zero out the blue, and in the green, let's just type 255. Let's click OK. And now let's adjust the fade out time to 0. And let's also adjust the end width to 100. We can just drag that all the way down to 100. Okay. Let's go in now and change our radar layer into a 3D layer. And we're going to adjust the 3D properties. I want you to type R for rotation, and on our X rotation, let's set that to 75. Just type that in. And on our Y rotation, we can set that to 10. And if we scrub across, this is what we end up with. So here are our radar waves. Now the last thing we need to do is move our radar waves down to about 1 second. Now that we've moved it down, we can also switch this to a screen mode. So let's click on our switches and modes and set this to screen. Let's turn on the eyeball for the storm background. We can scrub on this to see what we have. We have our background, and now we have our radar. Okay? Let's go in, back to our project window, and what I'm going to do now, this is where the style page really comes into effect, because I'm not sure what should happen next. So I'm just going to double-click on my style page and look at it. So I have my clouds, I put in my radar, which is actually an addition to what my style page was. Now all I have to do is put on my textured type in the background. So I can go back to my composition, go to the beginning. I'm going to switch from standard mode to text mode. I'll get my type tool. I want to make sure I'm in pure white, and I am. And I'm going to change my font to Arial. And let's change the font size to 14 points. Okay? I'll drag this down just a little bit. Let's change the text width back to 100. Let's change the tracking back to 0. And let's type in Storm Center, all caps. Let's put a space behind it, and we'll get our Move tool. Center this up just a little bit here. I want you to double-click on the T to select it, and then copy it. Command-C if you're on a PC, Control-C. I want you to type the End key to go to the end of the text, and then paste it about 10 times. So Command-V or Control-V on a PC, and we'll paste this 10 times. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That should be good. Let's get our move tool, and we'll position it right about here. Okay? I want you to type the letter P for position, set a keyframe in there, and I want you to go to the end of the timeline by selecting the end key on the keyboard, and let's just push this to the left till we get right about there. And if you want to set some numbers in, mine will be 350 on my X position. So we have that scrolling to one side. Now what we're going to do is duplicate this layer. So Command D to duplicate it. We're going to select P for position so I can see both of my keyframes. I'm going to select the word position. By selecting the word position, this will select both keyframes. And as long as I'm parked on one of these keyframes, both of the keyframes can be adjusted. So I'm just going to adjust my Y positioning. So I kind of get this letterbox about there. And I want the position to actually be the opposite of the position below. So while I have both keyframes selected, I'm just going to right-click on any one of those keyframes, go to Keyframe Assistant, and time reverse those keyframes. So now if I scrub on this, one goes to the right, one goes to the left. Okay? I can toggle collapse this. And we're going to type one more storm center in there. So getting my text tool, I'm going to switch from Arial to Arial Black. I'm going to change the point size. Let's just change it to 72. We can scale it after that. And let's just type in Storm Center. Okay. Let's get our move tool. Center this a little bit. And we can scale it. So I'm just going to grab one of the nodes, holding down Shift to constrain, stretch that up. Actually going to type the letter S to get to my scale property. Let's just scale that up a little bit more. Move this further down. And we're actually going to start with the S. Now I notice I have a lot of space between my letters. I'm going to adjust my tracking so it gets a little bit tighter, almost touching. And we'll move that about here. Okay. I'll type P for position, set a keyframe in there, go to the end of the timeline by selecting the end key, and then just push this over to the side just till I get to the C in center. Okay. Now the spacing a little bit off here, so I'm going to grab both of the keyframes and just move this down a little bit. Just nudge it down so it's centered a little bit better. And I'm going to turn off the other layers. And the reason I'm turning off the other layers is it's a lot easier to work with these three layers without having to process the QuickTime movie or the radar effect. Now the next thing we need to do is animate all three layers as one layer. So to do that, we're going to add a null object and then parent these to the null. So let's go up here, Layer New, Null Object, and let's rename the null object. Let's hit Return and name it Text Control. Return again. Let's right-click on the switches and modes to go to our columns and open up Parent. Let's select all three storm layers and switch them from None to Text Control. Let's select the Text Control null object, convert that to a 3D object, and I want you to type R for rotation. So let's adjust this a little bit. On the X rotation, we can move this back a little. Let's put that to -30. And on our Y rotation, can move that a little bit. Let's put that to -25. Let's set keyframes for both of those settings and go to the end of the timeline. Now on our X rotation, let's change that slightly. So we're at 20. And on our Y rotation, let's change that slightly. And we'll be on 20 as well. We can also adjust our position so we're not seeing this negative area on the storm center scroll. So I want you to go back to the beginning, type P for position, set a keyframe, go to the end of the timeline, and just on the X position, drag this slightly to the side. Now if we just Scrub back and forth. That is perfect. So let's toggle collapse this layer, and let's turn on our other layers so we can see how this works together. Now what we're going to do, we're going to select all three of these layers, and we're going to change the transparency. So type T for transparency or opacity, and let's type in 25%. Okay? Let's switch these to an add mode so that they glow a little bit with our background. We might even knock this transparency down a little bit more. Right about, we just want to barely see everything. So let's just type in 15. Let's toggle collapse these. I'm going to select the composition window, and I want to do a RAM preview to see where I'm at. So I'm going to hit the tilde key and type in 0 in my numeric keypad. And as we can tell, we're going in a great direction here. We have a background. The great thing about having a good background is we can use this in all sorts of ways now. If we needed to put video on top of this, we could use this. If we wanted to slow this down, we could do that. So always concentrate on the background to give it the best quality, and it will save you a lot of time in versioning. So let's hit any key to stop this. Let's hit the tilde key, and let's go back to the beginning of the timeline. The next thing that we're going to want to add is the storm foreground. So let's just drag that right onto the timeline. We're going to set this to an add mode, and we're going to change the rotation and the position. So I want you to hit P for position and R for rotation. We're going to set keyframes for these. So let's put a keyframe for position and a keyframe for rotation. On the rotation, I want you to put -45. And we're going to zoom in on this so you can see this a little bit, and we'll explain why we're doing this. The reason we're rotating this layer is so it looks like the rain is actually sweeping in another direction. So we have two wind currents. Let's go to the end and put that to 45. Okay, let's go back to the beginning. We're also going to want to scale and position this a little bit. So the position, let's move this a little bit on the X to about 290. And let's go to the end and move it a little bit more on the X. Let's say 340. Let's go back to the beginning of the timeline, and we're going to hit S for scale. We're not going to have to keyframe this. We just want to stretch the scale out so it reaches the ends of the animation. So just drag till it touches the ends. So one there and one there. So let's put it at 190. Okay? So this is what we get. A larger lightning bolt over our smaller lightning bolt. Okay? Let's toggle collapse that. Let's stretch that out a little bit. And let's bring in our logo. So we have Storm Tracker logo. All we have to do is drag that down to the beginning of the timeline, and we're going to preview it from here to see what we have. So again, selecting the composition window, press the tilde key, 0 on the numeric keypad. Let's see what we get. Now the first thing I notice when I'm looking at this is it seems like the storm tracker is just floating on top of the background, and it's not really incorporated into the animation. So what I want to do is go back, I'm going to click, press the tilde key, and move the storm foreground above the storm tracker logo. This way we get a layered effect where the lightning is actually on top of the logo as well as the rain. Okay? That'll also give us some dimension to our animation. Now we want also this animation or our logo to interact with the lightning strikes. So let's find out where those are at. So right here is the start of our lightning strike, and we can move this back a little bit to right where it starts. So at 21 frames, and we're going to adjust the levels on the storm foreground layer. So let's switch from the workspace text to workspace effects. And I want you to type in the effects and presets, levels. Let's double click on levels. Stretch this out just a hair. And we're going to take the white levels and just bring those in so it looks like it's interacting. Now, mistake that I've made. I'm on the wrong layer. So I just want to delete this and go to the right layer. So Storm Tracker logo, and we'll double click on levels again. We'll drag this down a little bit to right about here. So I want a little bit of the yellow going on, but I want a lot of the white to show up here. I'm going to set a keyframe for that, and I'm going to go a couple of frames before that and reset it. So it glows. We'll keep the glow going a little bit till the lightning leaves the logo. So right around there, we'll reset it again. Let's move down the timeline and find the other lightning strike. Okay, so here's a lightning strike. We'll move right ahead of it. We'll drag on the white levels till we just get white. Now here's the interesting thing. Remember in the beginning when we were creating this logo, we had this gradient. Well, look how it interacts now. Where the lighter part of the gradient was, we're actually getting white, but we're keeping some of the color around the S. So it's really working in our favor. So we'll pull that back just a little bit. I'm going to go a little bit ahead of it and just reset that, and then find out where the lightning ends. So right there, we'll just reset it again. And I'm going to want to preview this to see that it's working. So I'm going to select the composition window, press the tilde key, and hit the 0 on the numeric keypad. By adjusting the levels, we've created some interaction between the lightning and the actual logo. That'll give it a more realistic effect. Let's stop this and hit the tilde key to go on to our next settings. So let's go back to our standard workspace view and bring in the 7 glow. Let's just drag that down onto the timeline. And we're going to switch this to an add layer. So from normal, we'll go to add. The add will drop out the black areas and keep the light areas and actually allow those to glow. So let's move down on the timeline to where the 7 actually starts showing up. So right about here. So now we can grab the 7 glow layer and just drag that and position it so it hides the dissolve of our 7. We can also rescale that. So let's just hit S for scale. Scale that a little bit so it fits right perfectly around that 7. Let's just drag on this. And I'm actually going to turn off all of the other layers. I'm just going to solo the 7 glow layer, and I'm going to solo the Storm Tracker logo, because that's all I want to see, and see how these interact. I might move this down just a hair. So they come in, they wrap around, and they form the logo. Okay. But because I've rescaled this, you can see I'm seeing the end of the layer. So we're going to have to use a mask to soften this up a little bit. So let's get the elliptical mask tool, and we'll just create a mask from here, about that big. I want you to type F for feather, and let's just soften this so we get a nice feather on our mask. Let's put it to about 100. The next thing we're going to do is colorize this 7 glow. So let's go from our standard workspace to our effects workspace, and I just want you to type in toner. That'll get us to CC toner. Let's just double click on that. And again, this is a tritone effect, so we can adjust the highlights, we can adjust the midtones, and we can adjust the shadows. We're going to adjust the midtones. So let's just make that a nice blue. Okay. We can toggle collapse that, unsolo those layers. We can see how that interacts. So right when the lightning hits, it starts rolling around the 7. Let's take off the mask view. Let's click on the composition window, hit the tilde key, and let's preview where we're at. 0 on the numeric keypad. Okay, and our animation is done. And as you can see, by creating all of these simple animations, if you take these animations by themselves, they're actually not that difficult to create. But the strength of this, or the power of this, is taking these animations and then layering them together to create this rather complex animation. I totally recommend looking at more of your animations like this, where you can build them in components, render out those components so you don't have a lot of render time, and then you can take those and do a composite session. Now, what this does for you is you can go back and adjust things that need to be adjusted. It saves a lot of time in rendering, and it saves a lot of time in revisions. In other words, you can use this background over and over again. It's not connected to the Storm Tracker 7 logo. So that's really important. You can also use that 7 transition in a lot of different ways. So I hope that through this lesson that came across. So let's click on the composition window to stop our animation, hit the tilde key, and let's render our final animation. Let's hit the tilde key, make sure we have it named, and hit render.